People wonder how writers write their stories, so I wanted to give you a general idea. First, we start with the inspiration. Inspiration can come from almost anywhere, but the first place you look is the writer's actual life. Many stories, no matter how fictionalized, are based on something the writer experienced in their life. Second, inspiration can come from reading, watching, and just thinking about life. I know that when I read books and stories, I get ideas. I may think of a character, a world, a situation, or even a style. You can see this in a lot of writers' work. Haruki Murakami, for example, sets stories in a place that is like the real world, but usually just a little more magical. He tends to weave real-world history into his stories, often based in Japan's past. He also brings many American cultural references and classical music references to his stories. Most of these things stem from real-world interests that he brings into his stories, even if there is a magical element to them. Terry Pratchett built a magical world called Discworld that he set most of his stories in. He worked out the logic for that world, and he used that world to discuss concepts and ideas that are based on our world. He also couldn't resist a pun or a funny name. That's what he loved. Find the inspiration where you can. Keep a notebook or a file on your phone where you can record your ideas. The key is to catch the inspiration as it happens. The planning. Some writers plan their stories in detail. They create outlines, character sheets, descriptions of settings, and map out their key details in advance. We call these type of writers planners or plotters. Other writers just sit down and start writing. They assume that the ideas will come. We call these kind of writers pantsers because they write by the seat of their pants. Most writers fall somewhere in the middle. I based my last story on a character I had created as part of a role-playing game. I wrote out a basic plot and knew where I wanted to get the character to. I also mapped out several locations where I wanted the character to go. Beyond that, I just started writing. When a new character needed to be introduced, I wrote a basic description and moved on. For another set of stories I still work on, I've created an entire fictional city with multiple locations mapped out. I also have extensive biographies for all the major characters. On the flip side, I only have a general idea of where the plot is going, and I allow it to be driven more by the character interactions. The writing. At some point, the writer sits down and starts writing. Most productive writers set aside a time and place where they will write, and they sit down and do it. Usually the writer has a favorite tool for writing. There are still a few writers out there who write on a typewriter, write by hand, or record their thoughts and have someone transcribe them. Most of us sit down at a computer, though. We use some sort of word processing program, such as Microsoft Word. Personally, I use Scrivener for most of my work because it was built around writing stories. Some writers have a goal of a certain number of words or pages. I usually just set a time. So when I am working on a story, I like to have at least 1 hour of uninterrupted time per session, with the ideal being about 3 hours. I don't usually have a word goal or a page number goal. Sometimes I collaborate with another writer. We like to write 1,000 words apiece and pass the story back and forth. Usually we give ourselves a week before we pass back the story. In this case, I use Google Docs for the writing so that we can both see what we are working on. The editing. The last big phase of writing is editing. Editing can take a lot of forms. The basic part is proofreading, in which you read your story and fix typos, grammar errors, and things like using the wrong name. The next level is a light rewrite, in which you look at individual parts of the story and see if everything works, and rewrite anything that you don't think is as good as it could be. The highest level is a total rewrite, in which you change major parts of the story and often add new sections and delete chunks of the story. At any of these phases, you might bring in an outside editor. You can't always catch these things yourself. Eventually, the editing process is finished, though, and you have a complete story. So that's the story of how writers write. We'll save how writers get published for another time. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it.